and the policy initiatives that you all and the elected officials and staff come up with in response to community suggestions and concerns. I know that's a lot to take in, and I'm not trying to overwhelm you. We're going to make this as simplistic of a process as we can, giving you all as the planning board sufficient time to study, make observations, because ultimately at a certain point in time, you're going to be making a recommendation to the elected officials on adoption. So we're starting, from at least my standpoint, with the 3 chapters that you have very little ability to modify or change, because a lot of it's based on state allowance and state law. I'm going to be asking you some very pointed questions with these 3 chapters. And I'm looking for your direction, and I'm looking for staff's direction. So again, next month, as an example, you're going to be getting Article 4, which is going to cover your zoning districts. You'll get it a week or so, week and a half before the meeting, so you can review it. I'm going to present it. You're going to ask me basic questions, so then you get 30 additional days to review it and give me any additional comments, feedback, or concerns so I can address them. You're not taking action on this tonight. You're not taking action on it next month. You're going to get to see the updated, modified chapters and then see the entire ordinance in its glory and then make a recommendation at the appropriate time. But this is not going to be a methodic process where I dictate to you what you're going to do or not do. The only caveat is if state law says you can only do it this way, then I don't have a lot of flexibility to help you. Okay? We're going to have to follow state law. But my interest here is to make sure that this ordinance is a living, breathing embodiment of how the town wants to grow, put you in compliance with applicable state enabling legislation, and hopefully eliminate any complaint that could get you into court unnecessarily. I'm here to give you a tool that can be universally implemented and is understandable to you staff, and to the development community. Why? Because we're all supposed to be working together to facilitate purposeful growth in your community, whatever that looks like. Any questions before I start summarizing what will be Article 1, which is purpose, authority, and the official map? Again, I know this is a lot to take in, and I don't want you to feel that you can't come back and ask me questions as we go down the line. Okay? That's the whole part of this. All right. Seeing no initial questions, one of the concerns I have for your ordinance currently, as I've shared with your staff, is that you've got elements of effectively what would be normally construed as purpose authority in your zoning map in multiple sections of your code. So as a layperson, I have to read your document, decipher it, and go to, let's say, Article 1, Article 2, Article 5, Article 12. Scattered throughout the entire ordinance. It needs to be consolidated. Part of this new ordinance is going to be capturing like regulation or like standard or like policy, putting them all in one section. Make it easier to find. My other problem is you're missing some language that I think you need, because I don't want to hear somebody say you're not following state rules. I know you've heard me say that at least 3 times now, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be repetitive. But I am going to hammer that point home, okay? So let's talk a little bit about what this new Article 1 will do. We obviously are going to be having a section dealing with the enactment of this ordinance, this document, and the repeal of existing regulations. Why you can't have 2 ordinances imposed at the same time. This will take place with all your land use codes. All your land use regulations are going to go in one document now. Make it easier to find.
That includes the, excuse me, amendments. Man, try again. That includes the amendments?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, everything's going to be this one living, breathing document. I'm going to say it this way. This is a living, breathing document. You can modify it consistent with addressing issues with your comprehensive plan. This is not static. It doesn't live as whatever document I produce for the next 20 years without you being able to. We really need to address this issue. That's the whole process and whole purpose, to ensure that you're being consistent with your comp plan and do appropriate amendments. Okay? I happen to serve as the planning director on an interim basis for High Point. Management expects me once a month to identify any major discrepancies in the code and bring updates. Okay? So I actually work in a community where it's anticipated that I am going to be bothering their elected officials almost every other month with tweaks to the ordinance. Why? To address local citizen need as it relates to the application development regulations. There's nothing wrong with that. My hope is that I give you a document where you're not going to have to amend it every other month. So we're collapsing, obviously, your code, your zoning code, your subdivision ordinance, flood damage prevention, and any applicable watershed rules. Your watershed's going to have to follow state law. You don't have a lot of wiggle room there, sorry to say. Your flood ordinance is going to have to follow the minimum FEMA flood ordinance. And I'm going to be recommending updates to that. I happen to serve several communities as a certified floodplain manager, and let me just say that you're not the only ones that have to update the flood ordinance, okay? It's a universal problem. And it's just making sure that you're consistent with what FEMA says is the best practice. That simple. We will have the appropriate time to do effective date when this ordinance goes into play, when it's adopted. And one thing your ordinance technically lacks now, from my standpoint, what is the purpose of this document? What's the purpose of land use and zoning regulation? Section 141. Ultimately, it's to implement the comprehensive plan. That's the sole purpose of this ordinance. There are others, but that's its chief reason to exist. We are going to be looking to ensure the provision of efficient and provide for efficiency and economy in the development review process. What is fair and reasonable to applicants, to the town, as far as development activity. Remember that there are bills going before the General Assembly that are going to establish timeframes that you will have to observe in terms of reviewing development proposals. We've structured this ordinance to capture and be consistent with those schedules. You are obligated under current state law to process development applications in a timely manner. General Assembly is about to define what timely means.
What is it now, Mr. Harvey?
Currently, sir, general statute doesn't provide a definitive date. It's about to be 90 days. But in that breakdown that establishes how you, as a local government community planner, let's say, you have to respond if an application is complete or not within 5 business days. And if it's not, you have to reject it and put it in writing. If you don't, it's deemed acceptable. And if it's acceptable, you have to eat whatever it is. So part of the reason that we're suggesting to a lot of communities to update their rules is to make it as definitive as humanly possible as to what you have to do to get from A to B to C to D. So your staff knows, your applicants know, and if it's going before advisory boards, you all know what the process is. Okay? Obviously, we're regulating the use in buildings on land. We're regulating the development of signs, off-street parking, landscape preservation. We are providing for residential, commercial, and industrial growth through applicable districts. One other concern I have is your current land use or your current ordinance doesn't, in my opinion, and I should add parenthetically, I don't have Esquire after my name. I've just done this long enough that I sound like it. So let me make sure everybody understands I'm not a lawyer. But your current ordinance doesn't make appropriate, proper, or detailed enough reference to your comp plan. Remember, this is the implementing tool of your blueprint. So what we've provided, beginning on page 2 in section 142, is how this implements the comp plan. We also define the relationship in section 1.5 to the land use plan. And then we go into 1.6 defining what should be in your land use plan, all consistent with state law. So we're establishing your ordinance, the framework for how the comp plan is supposed to be organized and done. The comp plan is going to be approved in a totally separate process, okay? But remember, and again, I'm sorry, I know you've heard me, but it bears repeating. This document has to abide by, follow, and implement your comp plan. Can't go right when your comp plan goes left. That doesn't do you all any good. Not saying your current code does, but I think problem is your current code doesn't properly reference your comp plan. That's my opinion. So we provided a lot of specificity when it comes to your comp plan, referencing your comp plan. Jurisdiction. Some language I have in here is boilerplate until I get some feedback from your staff, and they've already given me one token of feedback, which is y'all don't have ETJ, which is fine. I have to include it in my model ordinance in case you do. What ETJ is, units of local government in North Carolina have the authority to extend their planning and zoning authority outside their corporate limits. Those parcels are not subject to taxation because they're not in the corporate limits of the town. But you can extend your planning and zoning authority, i.e. your districts, your development standards, your review criteria, over those parcels so that if and when they're ever consolidated into your community, the hope is the land use complies with the code. So we're going to be removing references to ETJ, but it's here for that very reason. It's a placeholder in case I missed something when I looked at your zoning map, because it's a lot easier for me to admit I overcompensated, that was an idiot, didn't put it in. Fair enough? Your staff and I have talked about the regulation of bona fide farms. I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. Remember, under state law, bona fide farms are exempt from county zoning review. They're exempt from zoning in your ETJs. They are subject to potential regulation in the municipality if the municipality chooses to regulate them. So there's a decision point that's coming. Your staff and I are reviewing what your policy is and how I'm going to rewrite this section of the code. But remember, bona fide farms include anything and everything defined under the term farming for North Carolina General Statute 106-581.1. That by definition includes agritourism activities. What's an agritourism activity? I wish I knew. The state left it ambiguous for flexibility. What I will tell you is the statute makes specific reference to wedding venues, retreat centers, and the like. Now, I will add parenthetically that prior to joining in Focus full-time, I served Orange County, North Carolina as their chief zoning enforcement officer and current planning supervisor. I was their watershed administrator, floodplain administrator, subdivision administrator, and I managed zoning. I had a staff. They were very thankful, however, I administered all of those programs. One of the biggest issues we had was addressing bona fide farms. And it's not going to change. I spent 4 years, either in the Board of Adjustment or in court, on one farm. 6 appeals, 8 court cases. We won. For the farmer one, I just got to be the one that got kicked around the curb for that period of time. It's a contentious issue. My interest is making sure that the ordinance I write reflects the value of the community. And that's another point I want to bring up to you all. In Focus is not coming into your community to dictate how you're going to look, how you're going to feel, or how you're going to grow. We see ourselves as an extension of your staff. We're your zoning officer. We're taking direction from your local experts. We're taking direction from you. What we are doing, however, is making sure that we're providing you a framework that will meet consistency with state law. There will be points in this process I'm somewhat dictatorial. Why? Because statute doesn't give you the flexibility not to be. And I'm not going to set you up to fail. I ethically can't do that. But the consultant is not coming in here telling you all what you're going to be doing. We are providing you a framework to solicit feedback and comment and get you an ordinance that you want. Okay? Thank you for letting me throw that little tidbit out. We've expanded your authority section. Why? Because there's other provisions in North Carolina General Statute 160D to give you authority to engage in these regulations. So we've updated chapter references of the state law that you should have. Most notably, 160D is the big one. That's the local government zoning authority. But technically, 113A, pollution control and environment, 121, environmental controls, 138, public highway, 133, public works, 136, roads and highways. All that relate to your authority to regulate land use development in your community. So we're making sure that you have that proper groundwork. Flood damage prevention. You've got a current ordinance. We're updating it to make sure it's consistent with the FEMA flood model. We're doing this now in half a dozen communities. We're not changing much as it relates to your current flood ordinance. I want to remind you all of another wonderful peculiarity of state law. We cannot engage in a process that results in a downzoning of property. What is downzoning? It's where you forcibly change the land uses, the density, the lot size of a parcel of property without the property owner's permission. So I'm going to throw out an example. I had a community, and yes, I still work with them. I had a community that had a minimum lot size in 90% of their jurisdiction of 1 acre. They wanted to go to 5 acres. I can't legally do that. Why? It would create nonconformities and it would alter density in the community. And by state law, as it exists right now, that's illegal. That's called downzoning. I would need to get everybody in that town's permission to do it. Why don't you all take a stab at how successful I was at getting about 1,200 property owners to voluntarily sign up, change their zoning to where instead of a 1 acre minimum lot size, it was going to jump to 5.
Ed, didn't we do that? When we went from,
No, sir.
No, that was actually a future requirement for housing.
okay, we went from 1/4 of an acre to R40. That was not what he's talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
This only came into effect in 2024. So to make sure everybody understands, this was a state law change in 2024, December. And it was hidden, yes, I'm being snarky, but it was hidden in the bill that provided aid to Western North Carolina for Helene relief. I'm gonna let that sink in just for a second. Because people like me who actually are trying to help Western North Carolina communities where I serve as a planner and an enforcement officer, couldn't argue against the bill because sorry. But we are updating your flood damage prevention basis of authority. I highlighted watershed because I'm going through your current regulations to see if you have any technically watershed area in the town of Fairview. If you don't, then this is obviously not going to be applicable.
I did a project in Unionville, and I went to the GIS, basically said everything was in the watershed.
Well,
Is that?
I follow state law. I serve as a watershed administrator in several jurisdictions. So bluntly, to answer your question, is that we will be looking at what the state determines is and is not watershed. I understand that Union County as an entity may have watershed areas and watershed districts that they impose, but my only concern is ensuring that if Unionville has any area in its jurisdiction that is defined by the state as being a watershed, and that's WS1, WS2, WS3, WS4, then you have to have watershed rules. Now, what is all that I just rattled off? It basically deals with areas that are in critical area, which means you're basically a public water intake source, or bounds of watershed is anything X distance away from that public water intake. I personally don't think you all currently have any parcel in your jurisdiction that is encumbered by state defined watershed area, but that's my job to figure out, not yours to worry about. There is a difference between watershed and floodplain, as you all know. Watershed is just the protection of natural area in and around the stream and the protection of the quality of the stream by limiting density and limiting built upon area or impervious surface. Floodplain is the application of federal produced flood insurance rate maps and ensuring development in and around floodplain, if your ordinance allows it, is consistent with applicable FEMA policy. Two different things. They may work in concert with one another, but they're technically two different issues. Conflict or inconsistency with other laws. This is a catch-all, bluntly, so that anything we do in this ordinance doesn't create a legal liability for the town. Your zoning regs do not usurp, take the place of, or invalidate covenants and deed restrictions. Conversely, you don't enforce covenants or deed restrictions. You only enforce land use law. So if a neighborhood adopts covenants and deed restrictions, that's on them to enforce. But just because your zoning law may allow for auxiliary dwelling units mother-in-law or granddaughter suite, however you want to define it. If the local covenant says we don't want them, they will enforce that prohibition, not you. But because you allow them, it doesn't invalidate their rules. Yes, sir. You look like I got a question. I didn't-
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'm just taking what you're saying.
All right, fair enough. I just didn't want to continue to draw on.
No.
What you're also going to notice, and I like to provide this, and I hope you all find it useful. I provide footnotes, so you understand my logic, even if you may not agree with it, you understand where I'm coming from. So when you see a footnote, it's trying to provide you some explanation as to why I'm recommending what I'm recommending, or from what section of your current code this is coming from. Okay? Severability. Any portion of this ordinance found to be illegal doesn't invalidate the whole ordinance, just invalidates that one section. So if I'm an idiot and I write you a sign ordinance that doesn't meet constitutional muster, because remember, all sign regulations have to be content neutral. We don't get to regulate the content of signage. Not that I'm going to regulate the content of signage, but bear with me for a moment. If I'm an idiot and give you an ordinance that does that, the court of competent jurisdiction says, no, if your sign ordinance is invalid, it just invalidates your sign ordinance. It doesn't invalidate the whole document. That's what severability is. Okay? Every ordinance should have a severability clause. Your current clause I've expanded on, not because I like being wordy, but because I like trying to cover all the bases. Interpretation of the ordinance. Remember, under state law and recent court cases, ordinances to be interpreted liberally to ensure the fair and reasonable use of property. You establish land use regulation for how somebody can get from A to B, that's perfectly fine. But you should always interpret your ordinance as to the fair and unfettered use of property. That's actually language used from a appeal court decision for the state of North Carolina. And my hope is, I'm going to give you an ordinance that does that. Rules of construction, how words are interpreted. Right now you've got this in a separate independent chapter from all other provisions of your code. It needs to be in Article 1, the basis for establishment of authority. In fact, hang on one second. Yeah, right now it's in section 12 of the current ordinance. Relationship of this ordinance to any pending action. I know that you all are dealing with some enforcement matters. The fact that we're updating the code doesn't invalidate those enforcement matters. That applicant still has to address the non-compliance or the notice of violation that's been issued by the community. Compliance. Guess what? People who develop in your community have to comply with this code. That's what this section says. We're going to be structuring your ordinance so that Article 4 effectively defines your districts. What's a residential district? What's an industrial district? What's a commercial district? Article 5 is going to deal with your land uses. And yes, we're updating your table of permitted uses. We're also making sure that your standards are consistent with state law. If you have a specific buffer requirement or a setback standard, and Article 5 explains that, we're going to make sure that it's uniform and reorganized to where it's easy to find. And I'm going to show you an example of what I'm going to ask you to look at in a minute. I don't have your ordinance, but I have an example that I'm going to propose to you. Okay? Watershed protection, if it exists, will also be in Article 4. General performance standards, such as parking, signage, and landscaping. Those are really only going to apply to commercial land uses. But we've defined what article it's in. Subdivision, guess what? You've got to comply with subdivision. That's listed. And obviously the flood ordinance. We are relocating all your standards because they're in 3 different sections right now on how your zoning map is established. Here, we're consolidating everything. Can't be in 3 different sections. It shouldn't be. Organizationally, it should all be in one central section. So, official zoning map, map certification and changes. How are you interpreting boundaries? We're ensuring that staff has the tools to determine how they're going to do something. So we talk about center lines. We talk about lot lines. So on your zoning map, I'll just use this map as an example. You may have a district boundary established. That district boundary may not necessarily match up with the property line. This section gives Ed and the staff direction how they're going to interpret that. Where they're going to determine that lot boundary is. Also remember that the ordinance is going to give staff some opportunity to make modifications to the zoning atlas to address inconsistencies with the map. Not change property without going through the official process. But let's be blunt. As map data gets better, your zoning data needs to reflect it. You may inadvertently have the driveway of one property because it got recombined after the fact, not fully in, let's say, your R40 zoning district, and let's say it's shown in a different district. Well, no, it's all part of that lot. It's all supposed to be zoned this. It's easy. We have a map error. That's a simple fix. You, Mr. President, may want to change the zoning of your property. Great, no problem. As long as that request is consistent with the comp plan, and you go through the appropriate legislative hearing process, you can change your zoning designation. But it's this section that determines how little inconsistencies can be addressed administratively by staff. And you have some of this language. I've just expanded upon it and moved it from 2 sections to 1. All right, state of emergency. This is something we're recommending all of our host communities incorporate. You have a tornado, you have a hurricane, some natural disaster that destroys houses. You want to provide some level of flexibility if there's going to be emergency temporary housing or temporary medical structures or temporary food distribution centers established, without them having to go through a zoning permit process for what effectively amounts to a temporary land use. So when there is a federally, by the president or by FEMA or by the governor, in declaring a state of emergency, the board for your community has the ability to say, fine, we're going to suspend certain zoning rules temporarily so we can address our problem. And then when the emergency dissipates, guess what? The rules are applicable. It's just a tool to give you some flexibility in the worst case scenario, where you have a major community-wide catastrophe and you're just doing your best to hold on and provide simple government service. This helps you address some public safety, health, and welfare issues on a temporary basis. I know that's a lot to take in. Again, you're not approving this tonight. I'm just explaining it. You're going to be, I'll take any questions you have at the appropriate time, but you've got another 30 days to look at this. And I want you to take that time and be comfortable. But anybody have any questions or observations about Article 1?
Just one quick minor point. I noticed a typo in 1.15.
Doesn't surprise me.
We're called Fairfield.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No biggie. And
I caught that after the fact, but I didn't catch it in Article 1. So that's my fault. I'm embarrassed, but mea culpa.
What do you think of a reg or something?
and there's an attached to that as well.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
No
And
problem, buddy.
I appreciate your understanding.
I'm the king of typos.
Well, I'm the king sometimes of creating typos, and I don't like it, but it happens.
Well, you can be happy.
And I'm gonna fit you.
I actually see that on the email, and I figured it was just.
Yeah, I was trying to do it fast, and guess what? When you do things fast, you make mistakes.
Do that every day.
Article 2, I want to talk about. Forgive me. And again, okay. So guess what? The mouse is dead. At least it seems to be dead. Article 2, there it is, consolidates all your administration functions and board functions into one chapter. You're going to notice the theme here. Consolidating everything where it makes sense. So administration of boards deals with what is your town council's authority as it relates to the application of this ordinance? What's the planning board's authority? What's the board of adjustment's authority? What's the staff's authority? What's the staff's responsibilities? All that is being consolidated into this one section. It's an organizational issue. The other thing we're doing is ensuring consistency with state law. And here's what I mean by that. State law now deals with conflicts of interest. So your town board, your staff, your planning board, your board of adjustment, you all have to address conflicts of interest. What does it mean? If you can't make an unbiased decision or if you have some relationship with the applicant, you have a financial stake, you have to recuse yourself. That simple. And state law has now become, and I was very excited about that provision being updated. I just wish some other people would observe it more.
Is that just recently, or is it?
So when Ms. Price had to recuse herself when we were voting on BB's rezoning?
I don't think she did,
Well, she had a relationship with BB, right?
but I don't think the ordinance was in effect then.
No, I'm just saying if that would have happened now.
Yeah, it would be,
Well,
yeah, she would have to now.
So, not to take away Ed's thunder, but let's pick on you for a second, Alex.
Go ahead.
Since you're sitting there.
Right.
Let's assume Rodney here is coming with a rezoning request.
Hmm.
Let's assume you have a financial stake
Well, we had just
in
had
that property.
this issue where
Mhm.
there were members of the community who were asking one of the town council to recuse themselves.
Okay,
So it just had happened,
gotcha.
last year?
Yeah,
So,
What was if you don't mind my asking, then let me let Ed provide some context as well. I don't want to silence staff, but what was the context of the request for recusal?
BB had asked to rezone his farm use to light industrial, and one of the council members, Ms. Price, had his daughter?
It was
Uncle, and
uncle by marriage.
By
Not
marriage.
marriage.
And some of the people who were opposed to the rezoning had asked her to recuse herself. She did not. It didn't matter, but I'm just saying that was a situation I think would apply.
She used the financial. She didn't have any financial. It was far enough away, I thought, to say that she didn't have any financial interest in that. I mean,
Right,
So I
if there is
didn't
no
think-
financial involvement, then there's no need to.
now,
technically
was she
recuse.
related? Well, a little, but it wasn't like her brother or her son.
Yeah,
it wasn't blood kin.
I just didn't know what degree of separation we're talking about.
But now she would have to under this new one, so.
Right.
Well, the new ordinance-
The law's very explicit on
Right,
that.
but the new ordinance wouldn't necessarily compel her to recuse unless there was a potential financial stake.
So it's based on
So
the financial.
familial,
If,
does not.
well, it would, but let's talk about that for a second. So Sharon, let's say I, your son, or I, your nephew, were coming to do an action that you had to vote on. Then there would probably be strong enough suggestion you should recuse just to avoid the view of impropriety. But your brother-in-law's cousin, you're probably, as Ed's pointed out, and I would agree, you're probably long enough removed that as long as you declare, here's the relationship, I can make an unbiased decision, and I have no financial stake in it, you are not going to be in violation of the conflict of interest clause. But you do have to disclose, and that's something important you have to make sure of. If there's even a hint of a potential for impropriety, disclose it. Rely on your staff to help you. Okay?
I mean, I voted against the ordinance, but I kind of think she should have been able to vote in that case. myself.
Gotcha.
I was the only one that voted against it.
What's her name? It's-
Her daughter taught my daughter last year.
Not our claim.
Remember that most.
I thought I was gonna go.
Yeah, so that.
All right. Remember that the advisory boards have to take an oath. You got to support this ordinance and defend the state constitution, the federal constitution. You can't act in disregard for it. Your staff's going to be taking an oath too. Why? Because they're making determinations, of course, in this document. Started work in accounting, doesn't matter which one. We argued we should be sworn. County manager at the time said, you don't need to be sworn. We went to the county attorney and got sworn anyway by the clerk. What happened? 6 months later, we got sued. What are the arguments? People were never sworn. I was. My name's the only one all over this. Boom. After that, everybody was sworn. Now, I often get sworn at, but you will take the oath that you will support and defend local ordinance and the applicable constitutions. You're not going to validate local, state, or federal law. That's all. And it's a good measure to make sure you do because it encourages, promotes, and it's professional. It's what you're supposed to do. Okay?
I agree with it.
Floodplain and watershed administrator, what do? It defines it here. And obviously watershed administrator only stays if I come come to the conclusion you need it. Planning, zoning, and subdivision administrator, staff. What are their responsibilities? And yes, they have to be sworn. Here are their general duties. We've expanded on their general duties. Why? Because it makes it more consistent with state law.
I go back to watershed administrator.
Yeah.
It's very limited in his time.
Yep.
And people like to beat up on him. Would it be?
Well, we're the favorite targets of everybody, sir.
No, that's usually me. But would it be conceivable to turn around and have the Union County do the watershed administration for town of Fairview?
It depends. I'm going to say yes with a caveat. The caveat is if you have regulations or restrictions more restrictive, because state law in certain instances does allow you to do that. Not that you will, but I'm just giving you, for instance, if you have more restrictive standards, you can't expect the county to do that for you. You have to do it yourself.
So it would have to be consistent basically with what they do.
Yeah, and bluntly, we're following state law, so it's moot. So yes, the direct answer is I might get you to that point if we have to do it. From a floodplain standpoint, I think you all should be administering your own flood ordinance.
I
But
do too, because if you set that precedent, then you're gonna.
I'm also willing to admit to all of you, you have the flexibility to potentially contract with the county to do that for you. I've worked in jurisdictions where that happens. It's not inconsistent, but you have to make sure your ordinance is consistent. And I'm not about to say anything negative on Union County at all, because I've never read their flood ordinance. But if their flood ordinance is consistent with the state minimum model, no. Now, if they update it, great. That's my only caveat. But yes, sir, I'm painfully familiar for what it's like to be a one-man show. I do that for a couple of communities, and
Like
Yeah,
old
that's it.
one-man show.
Floodplain and all that stuff seems to be a moving target.
oh, it's always going to be a moving target. Yes, sir.
And it's gonna be worse for you.
Yep. And I'm speaking from 20 some odd years as being a certified floodplain manager. It's always a moving target. Now, I don't want to waste your time, but remember that floodplain administration is predicated based on what the needs of the community is. And I'll give you a prime example. I've served in coastal North Carolina for several communities as a CFM, processing floodplain permits, where the flood standards are vastly different from where I served for about 18, 19 years in Orange County as their floodplain administrator, where they didn't want development in the flood zone. Two different communities having two different philosophies. Neither one are wrong, as long as it's codified in the code. I'm going to give you an ordinance that meets the minimum model. I'm not going to be more restrictive than the minimum model. Even though there's benefits to it, I unfortunately think that I would be setting you up to fail on a charge of downzoning if I did that. Why? Because floodplain is considered a land use amendment. So if I make the flood ordinance more restrictive, technically I need everybody's permission impacted by floodplain in your community. Until state law is changed. And yes, there's a bill to do that. But since they can't even pass a budget, why don't you take a wild stab at how successful they're going to be getting that one bill changed? There are conditions on staff's authority. We're spelling that out. Remember, staff errs, not that we ever err, but if staff errs in issuing a permit, the ordinance always applies.
So if there's a procedural error, the ordinance, what are you saying now that?
So let's assume I, in my infinite wisdom, issue a permit to allow a land use in a district where I misread the table of permitted uses. That land use doesn't fit in that district.
Right.
The town can enforce the ordinance. The fact that I was an idiot and issued a permit, it was issued in error, still enforcing the code. There's a famous court case dealing with a bakery in Raleigh, North Carolina, where the city didn't choose to enforce the ordinance for 30 years. When they finally did, the owner took them to court and said, "You can't do this, I've been here." Court basically said, well, yeah, it took them 30 years to get to it. That's legal. I have an ethical issue with it, but
So what happened?
they actually worked out a deal where it could stay. They did an ordinance amendment, which guess what? That's how some of this should work. But
Yeah.
I'm sorry, now I'm being a little too snarky. Don't mean to be.
But you're right.
I have put in your draft model ordinance, a technical review committee, which you may not need. What a technical review committee is where city staff and external stakeholders, DOT, utility, health department, et cetera, all review and provide comments on a development proposal. I'm going to defer to Ed if he wants that layer of detail in the code, but it's really just designed to where staff from various disciplines get together, rip apart a plan, and help an applicant understand what they have to do to bring it into compliance with multiple issues dealing with applicable enforcement regulation. This is not mandated by state law. This is optional. I defer to the staff to tell me what they want. But I got to give you the tool, and you tell me you don't need it. I'd rather that happen than us have to come back after. So here's how the planning board and board of adjustment are established. Consistent with state rules. And again, guess what? Voting, conflicts and violations of due process, all consistent with state law. Now, do I think you're acting in direct contradiction to state law? No. But your ordinance ought to define what that means. Okay? Same with the board of adjustment. I've also updated all your references. Whoever did your ordinance previously did a really good job at updating code references to changes in state law. Originally, land use regulations were kept in 2 chapters of the state rule. 153A for counties and 160A for municipalities. The problem was they referenced each other all over the place. So another smart move by our wonderful legislature was to consolidate everything into 1 chapter. So you don't have to keep going back and forth, back and forth. And you didn't have contradictions. It got to a point where you actually had county contradictions contradicting municipal guidance and municipal applicable law, but the reference made you have to comply with both. It was a nightmare. So while I defame our General Assembly in certain instances, I will support really good work they did. This is one example. Meetings, hearings, and boards, remember, every meeting of the planning board is open to the public, but it doesn't make it a public hearing. Open to the public. Every meeting of the Board of Adjustment is open to the public. But you have to have standing to present evidence. Who determines if you have standing? Board of Adjustment. Who says so? State law. So if you want to argue on a variance, you have to show the board that you have standing to do so. Otherwise, you have no ability to speak at the meeting. Or you shouldn't be able to influence the outcome, I'll say it that way.
What constitutes standing?
That's a really good question, sir, because the courts haven't even told us what constitutes standing. There are 3 technical tests, and even the General Assembly and courts have invalidated some of these tests in certain ways. Primarily, you have to show that you will have a financial impact as a result of a decision. Proximity doesn't even matter anymore according to the Court of Appeals. And I'll give you an example of proximity. And is this a dry eraser here or a dry marker?
Yes.
So if I draw on this board, I'm not going to defame your board?
No, you're not gonna stop.
Okay.
Just that's fine, Jim.
There you go. All right, take it out of my contract. I own this property and I need a setback variance for whatever reason. And again, I have to show hardship. I have to show how I didn't do this. I have to prove that the application of regulation is forcing an issue on me. Okay? The way it used to go, Christy here, because I saw her name as I turned around. She's the neighbor. She doesn't think I deserve a variance. It used to be that proximity to the request had some value, and technically on one level it does. But unless there's going to be an express financial hardship created, the board technically can make the finding they don't have standing. So it's pretty much associated with, show us you're going to financially be impacted by this decision.
Does that include loss of land value?
Yes, but you have to prove it.
Because that's a pretty common thing here. Is whenever something tries to get rezoned, the claim is that it's going to, decline their property value in some way.
Well, yes, that would be a good example if it was a variance case, but in a rezoning, financial impact is not germane to the discussion. It's whether or not it's compliant with the comp plan. You can argue or you can suggest that if you rezone this property from residential to industrial, and that's a really bad example, but it's the one I'm going to use. Oh, it's just going to negatively impact my property value. That's not a basis of denial for the elected official. Does it comply with the comp plan? Is it consistent with the goals, policies, and strategies? And if the answer is, we would not allow industrial there, then they're adopting a statement of consistency and reasonableness that says it's not compliant with the comp plan. Special use permits are another good example of where standing comes into play, and where, yes, impacts to adjacent property values is one of the mandatory requirements that has to be addressed. Any questions on Article 2? Again, I know it's a lot to take in. I'm not expecting you all to.
Are you looking for little suggestions? Because we have 7 members and two alternates on our
Yeah.
planning board. Okay, because this said 5.
No, I caught that after, and I just.
I looked around and counted real quick. I go, there's a lot of people in this room.
I did it because that's the model, and I tailor it to the local community need.
Gotcha.
We are going to be giving you updated rules of procedure for Ed to review and look at as well. I'm sorry, maybe.
That's okay. This is just, it might be just picking at something not important.
Everything's important.
My first reaction was that Article 2 should be Article 1 and Article 1 should be Article 2. That you are introducing our bodies, starting with the town council, and how we operate and our responsibilities, and then give us the ordinance and how it's to be laid out. And this seems backwards to me. I don't know if it does to anybody else, but we're talking about the ordinance, and then you say, and here are the people who are responsible, and everyone needs to understand what their responsibilities are, applicable to what we have already introduced to you. And my thought was that it just needed to be turned around the other way. Maybe introduce the town and all of its members and responsibilities, and then introduce the ordinance.
Okay. I'm not saying that it's not a bad suggestion. We can look at that. The reason it's organized the way it is Article 1 establishes the basic authority for you adopting the ordinance in the first place.
So it was you.
But the town, you don't get to the roles of the council, the planning board, or the board of adjustment without establishing the legal existence of you to have a rule in the first place. Because the town, the planning board, and the board of adjustment and staff have no authority until you physically establish the legal right to impose the ordinance from the beginning. And that's why we organize it the way we did. I'm not saying that we can't look at it and see if we can do it that way. I'm just giving you a direct answer to why I organize it typically the way I have.
I may be the only person that it bothers.
It's not a problem if it only bothers you. It's a question of making sure that I'm addressing your concern. So I have no problem looking at it.
Okay.
I'm just going to explain to you what my rationale, my logic is.
I like your rationale better because.
Well, there's nothing wrong with the rationale.
No, it's not
Yeah.
either, but,
Yeah.
Well, you gotta have a town before like the people that.
right,
Yeah.
right.
And you got the authority from the state,
Yeah.
and then from the
And then,
town,
and then
but then you
the,
need to reference the town
Right.
and the state authority.
right.
Right. Now, I'm going to say this. If that's the only true criticism we have, and I've had 1,000, I'm going to take the victory. I'll make sure to provide a more detailed answer. We'll look at it. I'm not saying I'm not going to, but I appreciate your comment. I also appreciate the fact you understand where I'm coming from. So if there's no other questions on Article 2, I'm just going to summarize Article 3. I'm going to let you read it because it's lengthy. But all your permit standards are now captured and located in one document. Well, how do I get a permit? Right now, it's spread over 2 or 3 different articles, not anymore. So we're producing this table for you, laying out who has the authority to review what, who's a decision maker, who's a reviewer. Simplified. It's just a tool so that the layperson reading it knows if they're doing a zoning compliance permit, they're going to be dealing with staff. If they're doing a general zoning amendment, Well, staff's gonna review it, planning board's gonna review it, and the elected official's gonna be the ultimate deciding factor. And I gotta go through three steps. I've also consolidated and updated, I'm sorry, that's a theme. How applications are filed, timely processing of applications. That question was already asked by Mr. Rogers. I'm not referencing the 90-day clock because it hasn't been adopted yet, but it's growing. But right now, I've got what timely application means.
So what happens again now, so we
If you violate timely processing under state law as it is anticipated to be adopted,
Yeah.
state law would say that it's automatically deemed approved. You should have been more diligent.
So if we send a letter saying we need more information, is that?
No, that stops the clock. If the application's deficient, you are not bound to live with that application. The applicant, and that goes to burden of proof, the applicant has an obligation to demonstrate they meet the code. There's no way around that. Burden always falls on the applicant. So with Ed, looking at a site plan, needs a landscape plan and a parking plan, and I, the big bad applicant, walks in and says, no, I'm not giving it to you. Well, then your application's not complete, we're not processing it. Have a great day. Don't let the door hit you in the way. Ed will be a lot nicer than I will be.
So I just have a question on that. With 5 days, did you state that 5 days was the time in which you had to respond? So if somebody applied on Thursday after Ed left for the day, that would mean by Tuesday, we would already be delinquent.
Business days.
It's gotta be
But it's still,
gotta be working day.
you still have,
Holidays, weekends.
Does it, well, I was, so it's gotta be
Right.
his working days, which are just 2 days a week, so that would be
Yep.
2.5 weeks.
but the way the state rule reads now as proposed to be adopted, because it hasn't been adopted yet. I'm just setting up the framework for you to be there.
Mhm.
The way it says now is you have 5 business days. If this town's only open for business 3 days a week, it's based on that 3-day open period. To give you a direct answer to your question.
Yeah,
But that's
I
a
just was
good,
making sure just because
No,
we would
that's a
already be
good question.
delinquent on a
that's a
application.
great question. And my sincere hope is that state law is going to do exactly what it says it's going to do.
You think it should go to 5 days?
I think it's 5 business days. All you're doing is determining completeness in that 5 days. You're not reviewing and making a decision. So in this model, Ed, I get to pick on Ed all night. Ed is looking at an application. Is it complete? Does it have everything I need to review? Does it have all the elements to make it a complete application as defined by this ordinance? If it doesn't, then Ed's decision is, I'm rejecting it. Here's why.
So what if, I'm just throwing it out there, because Ed has no backup, I mean, Teresa's his backup, I guess, but
Mhm.
like, what if Ed is sick? And not Tom is, I don't know, I'm just.
You're gonna have to
throwing it out
figure,
there, but like-
the blunt answer is you gotta figure something out, and I'm sorry to be the one that has to say that.
But that's not adopted
Going
yet.
to the hospital.
But you have to figure something out. You're gonna have to have that
And it has, sounds
response.
like it has to be something official in writing.
Yes.
It would have to be like,
And that's a question, and that's a question a lot of planners are asking the General Assembly. What happens if one stop shops? What happens if you have catastrophic illness? What happens if COVID comes back and you're shut down? That's one of the reasons it's been adopted yet.
yeah, I can't.
But I think you as a community just need to prepare for that potential. I've structured the ordinance to basically say it has to be processed in as a timely manner as humanly possible.
I think timely makes more sense than setting a 5-day.
Yeah. But I just want to make sure that I'm honest with you.
Yeah.
I may be coming back to you and saying, I've got to do this. And you ain't gonna like it, and I'm sorry.
Well, then just say timely, define timely.
Right, well, that's what, I'm like.
State, yeah, the state rule right now, what they want to say is timely is 5 business days to determine completeness, and then you have a max of 90 days to review. And if the applicant doesn't provide you what they need, then that review stops until they do.
Too bad they don't do that with the DMV, but.
Stops or starts over?
Well, it doesn't start over, but it stops. So I'll give you a prime example, and I'm sorry to compare you an apple to a watermelon, but that's what the comparison is going to be. In High Point, where I'm responsible for plan review and making these determinations, their ordinance actually says 5 business days already. If it's encumbered by floodplain and there's no floodplain permit, or there's no partial portion of the site plan defining for me what impacts it will be to the flood zone, guess what? Application is rejected. And my review stops. If everything's complete and it takes me 10 days to get my comments out, and that's land use, parking, buffers, watershed compliance, soup to nuts, everything. Okay, here are our 10 pages of notes. Our review process stops. It's now back in your hands, Doug, as the applicant. So if it is a 90-day time period, our 90 days has only been 10 days. It's now back in your hands. And if you give me garbage, oh, sorry, didn't answer our question. Stop talking. Developers aren't happy with this.
It doesn't start over, it
No.
just stops.
I would like for it to start over.
I'm afraid state law is not going to get you there. They're not going to be interested in that. I'm sorry. We provided more detail on your form and application and filing fees, application fees that have to be paid. We are recommending you all look at what's called a pre-application conference. I think Ed does this automatically without any real mandatory requirement. It's just Tim being a person who is interested in ensuring viable development activity. Bring me a concept of what you want to do, and let me review and give you some feedback before you spend a ton of money for no good reason. We're just putting it in the code. Application completeness. What constitutes a complete application? Well, we're defining it. What happens if an application is withdrawn that requires a public hearing? Well, if you advertise the hearing and you withdraw it, well, you can't bring the application back for a year. Why? Because we've already advertised. If you got scared, that's on you. Now, I should add parenthetically, would it surprise anyone to know that there's a bill potentially going to the General Assembly that would limit some of my authority to do that? But I'm holding you to what the general statute currently allows me to do, not what I think it's going to do.
They want to tell us what to do, when to do, and where to do it.
Yep,
And it's getting worse too.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm also recommending you consider some neighborhood meetings. What's a neighborhood meeting? Short and sweet. Applicant holds a meeting with neighbors, his best new friends, and educates them on the who, what, where, when, and why of the project. I find this to be an invaluable tool to educate the general public. Doesn't necessarily abate all the concerns, but if they understand this is what I'm held to, it helps facilitate some level of understanding. And it makes the development process, in my humble opinion, move smoother. All right.
What was that one called? You said neighborhood.
Neighborhood information meetings, section 3.3. And again, that's optional. You don't have to do it. I'm hoping you do.
We do it now.
should, and how
Yeah, we do it now.
We do it
Once a
now.
year.
No, it's pretty.
It's
Usual,
private.
usual complaint that's not
Oh, so
far
it's
enough
just.
out.
If you're doing
Yeah.
it.
The usual complaint's not far enough out.
You remember that one developer,
Oh,
she
yeah.
said she did it, but she didn't do it?
Yeah.
That was a, well,
Yeah, yeah.
So remember, you have to have a permit approved before you can do anything. Who'd have thought? Your current ordinance says that. I'm just putting it more bluntly. Remember, by state law, you have permit choice and you have ordinance choice. State law mandates, you can't get away from it. What does it mean? Ed's reviewing an application of mine right now. Ordinance changes tomorrow. I get to choose which ordinance I get to be under. Do I want to stay with the current ordinance, because that's what I designed it to, or do I want to move to the new ordinance? It's defending your vesting, for lack of a better way to put it.
now, is there a sunset where you can go back?
The sunset only is if you don't keep that application active, God help you. You lose your rights.
Okay.
But that's defined under the statute. Periodic inspections, guess what? Staff does get the right to inspect your work. I know a lot of people don't like that, but as long as I show proper credentials, I have legal authority to go on a property that has a permit to verify compliance. Certificates, that's pending, that's for usually your subdivisions. Zoning compliance permits. So what we're doing is breaking down You're gonna have special event and temporary structure permits, site development and construction plan approvals. That's both residential and non-residential site plans, okay? Special use approvals, you already know about special use approvals. It's for those land uses that the board has deemed are permitted in a given zoning district, but the impacts are potentially negative beyond the borders of the property. It has to go through the quasi-judicial hearing process, where the applicant has to prove with competent material evidence and sworn testimony they meet your code. Watershed protection if it's required, watershed occupancy, because if you have to do a watershed permit, you legally have to do what's called a watershed occupancy permit. State law. Subdivisions. All those processes are now captured in this one chapter. Flood permits. So you're going to see this theme. I'm a big proponent of tables, flow charts, application submitted. If it's complete, it's processed, approved or denied. I like putting things simplistic so people can see how they get from A to B. Now, when you get to subdivision, you're going to say, that doesn't look simplistic to me. And I understand that. And I'm willing to take that critique and make some changes, but I wanted to capture everything in the process allowed, okay? I'm not going to go through each individual permitting process. I'd like you to read and come back to me with questions, only because it's 7:10, and I could go on for another hour. I don't think there's a need for me to go on another hour, because I think you get the gist. The one thing I will say is that this section also captures conditional zoning permits or conditional zoning process. It captures development agreements where an applicant in the town can actually engage in an agreement under state rules to allow for development to occur, for making sure you have all the tools in the toolbox to be successful. Now, what happens next? You get 30 glorious days to look at this. You get to put it in your bird feeder, in your bird cage, so it can be, useful after you're done with it. And you're going to come back to me with any questions, comments, concerns, or observations. Nothing's out of bounds.
Do you want the questions sent to Ed, or you
Yeah,
want to?
you're going to send the questions to staff in case you have issues you want to bring up with them. Next month, we're going to look at Article 4, which is your districts. We're also going to start looking at the table of permitted uses only from the standpoint of organization. Next month, I'm also going to talk to you about what constitutes where we are with the comp plan. We're going to start that process a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the surveys we have. We're going to talk about your future land use map that Ed and staff are looking at right now. And we're going to talk about organizationally how it's going to go. Now, I want to show you an example of the table of permitted uses. I haven't gotten this far with you all yet, so forgive me. But I kind of want you to get you the idea. Everybody see that? Okay, I know it's small. But how I like to do my tables, and this is a county, because that's the example I pulled up. We have land use categories: agricultural, residential, assembly, whatnot, where we group similar land uses. And it's either permitted or allowed by right. It's permitted subject to compliance with standards in Article 5 of your code. Setback buffers, building size, whatever. It's allowed with a special use permit, that's the S, where you have to go through the evidentiary hearing process. And if it's blank, it's not permitted. That activity is not permitted in that district. We are going to also, as part of this process, be redefining all your land uses, or ensuring that we have an adequate definition of your land uses. From an additional organizational standpoint, I will show you this. So when we get to Article 5, which won't be for a while, but you're going to get the gist. There are uses that we say are permitted as a matter of right in every district. Most of those are utilities. Why? Because you got to have utilities in districts. Roadways are technically considered to be permitted in every district. Bus shelters, You may have the need for bus shelter, that should be allowed in every district because it serves the community good. We have specific definitions on special uses. We will be recommending certain land uses not be approved through your conditional zoning process. Why? If you have certain sensitive land uses that you don't think should be anywhere other than the district they're in, and adult land uses are ones that I always pick on, you don't want somebody to come through the conditional process and say, well, I want to do an adult gentleman's club here because I'm going through the CZ process. We specifically prohibit it. And we have the authority to do that under the code. We also define, in my model, what various land use categories are, including a definition of what constitutes, let's say, the ag land use category. We provide a list of example uses that may not necessarily reflect the table, but they're designed to give you, the reader, the idea of what we're allowing. And then we provide exceptions. One exception, for example, for this particular client, is they wanted the processing of animal or plant products to actually be considered a manufacturing land use if it's not happening on a bona fide farm. So Fred, I'm going to pick on you again. You want to open up an animal processing plant. You're not a farm. You just think you should be, that's the land use you desperately want. Okay, no problem. You are classified as this, and it's only allowed in these districts. It's not ag. Think of exceptions as defining the limits of what that land use category is meant to be, okay? Standards are organized by the land use category. So any assembly land use, assembly is where people congregate, just to be specific. It's not assembly as in making a product, that's manufacturing. All assembly land uses are located in one section. And if it's general standard, it's just use standards and standards for district. If it's a special use permit, here are the standards you have to meet if you're proposing this as part of the special use permit process. So the ordinance provides a level of distinction between special uses and permitted uses, but there's standards you still have to abide by. Okay? And you will have obviously opportunity to review that consistent with my proposal for Fairview at the appropriate time. But from an organizational standpoint, it always makes sense to me to define at this meeting kind of what's coming and how we're going to reorganize your ordinance a little bit. Any general questions?
But if somebody wanted to put a gentleman's club, we would still have to go through the process. I mean,
Yep.
right?
So back to the buses, we're talking about school buses, right?
Well, no, it's, but bus stops for school buses are administered by the school system. I'm talking, when I say bus stop or bus terminal, I'm talking about any municipal transit system or a county transit system.
So we don't have room for
Yeah.
But like, yeah.
So that's irrelevant.
Fairview.
Well, no,
We're
it's
not
relevant.
introducing that?
Yeah, right.
It's relevant to understand what the issue talks to.
Yeah.
Bus stop, I don't get that authority and don't want it. But if you have a public transit station,
If you do. I know.
you ought to be able to put that anywhere bluntly because it serves a purpose. And yes, you get to look at my family. Thank God they look like my mother. Any questions? I know it's a lot to take in and I'm not trying to overload you, but I do want to make reasonable use of your time. Do you have a comfort level, at least so far, understanding the logic behind this, and then you're going to get into the minutia as your staff is? So yeah, you're going to be getting your comments to Ed. Ed and the staff are already getting me some initial feedback. I look forward to your feedback, and in a couple weeks, you're going to get a whole new packet, and we're off and running to the races. This is going to be fun. You're going to become bored with it. Let me also remind you one other thing, as I've told your elected officials. Once this ordinance is done and adopted, per my contract, you have a 2-year warranty period with me. So in focus, practice what it preaches. That's a business decision. So if your staff has questions, concerns, comments, or Mike, this doesn't make any sense, what were you thinking? Were you enjoying too much bourbon the night you were writing this? No, but we can all think that. We're here for 2 years to make sure it's administered truly and soundly. And if there's any tweaks that have to be made, we're here to help you with that. It's a warranty. You got 2 years. Why do we do that? Because we like to take care of our clients. It's just that simple. And we do it for everybody. Everybody we do an ordinance for has 2 years warranty.
Question about the comments?
I'm a little concerned about the state taking over the zoning and everything. There's been movement on that in the state legislature.
Yes,
And where does that stand? I mean, what do you
They
think?
postponed it, right, Michael?
yep. Right now, Mr. Thomas, there are several bills going through the General Assembly that would further restrict local government authority on zoning, be it municipality or county. That is stalled. We're hopeful it stays stalled. But originally, it was going to go to a point where they were going to dictate to you what density you had to allow in certain districts.
Right.
That bill is somewhere. It's in committee. I think the General Assembly bit off, this is my opinion, and it's worth about as much as a cup of coffee. General Assembly bit off a little bit more than it could chew, and I think when the light of day started shining, some of these provisions didn't make any sense. But I'm going to be honest, the density issue has been one for the last 6 years I've seen come and go on several occasions. And our big concern has always been, well, I, as a municipality or county that has to enforce state watershed rules, have very specific restrictions on density. You can't tell me I can't follow state law. Well, we'll get back to it. Yeah,
It still wouldn't hurt us to stay after Todd Johnson, Richard Hudson, Mark Harris.
no,
Let them
you
know
should
that we are
always,
against it, so.
you
And
should,
I'll call them, and and they'll call you back, might take a day or two. But when it was actually supposed to be, actually that day I was on the phone, I was wearing them out. And they called me back, but,
I mean, I don't know why they feel the need. to
Well,
do that.
well, I'll tell you-
they know better for you.
I'll tell you the story that I've heard,
What's that?
and I don't want to pick on Durham because I've done work for Durham, but I happen to like the
That
Durham
area
staff.
there.
A property owner was denied a permit. Now, why were they denied a permit? Well, they were denied a permit because they had a land use that was illegal. It was non-conforming. So they went and cried to a member of the General Assembly. So all of a sudden, local zoning's run amok.
Yeah.
We just need to reel it back in and remind them who they work for. You work for us. And the real sick part of this story is that the Durham staff, and yes, I'm going to defend the Durham staff because they did everything right. Durham staff went to this person not knowing they had complained to the General Assembly and said, look, here are your 4 or 5 options, and we can make this work. Oh, had I known that, I wouldn't have made a big deal with it. At least that's the way the story was explained to me by a Durham County staff person. But, you know, there is some concern at the General Assembly that units of local government have gone too far with some of their regulations. Why don't you take a educated guess on the people that are the common folks to get blamed, and you're probably going to be about 80% correct. It's most of the Piedmont.
Yep.
It's the Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill area. And I'll tell you, I'll tell you the one example that I always get thrown in my face. As I've alluded to, I served Orange County, North Carolina for 19 years. And Chapel Hill, which is in Orange County, has their own zoning rules. Chapel Hill has a process, and this is not hyperbole, folks, this is the truth. Because I, as a county planner, had to go through their process to get something done. I went through site plan review for 2.5 years. Let that sink in for a minute.
Carver is not much better.
No, Carbo's potentially worse, and I've actually done an assessment of Carbo for their staff. Yep. That's the one example the General Assembly loves to smack me upside the head with, and I don't have an argument. My only argument is not everybody's Chapel Hill. And to paint the broad brush that everybody's as bad as Chapel Hill is just as bad as what Chapel Hill, quote unquote, does in your opinion, Mr. Legislature or Mrs. Legislature. So it's degrees. A lot of that's changing just because the nature of review is changing. But yes, I still get that a
Well,
lot.
that's the problem with the DMV, like, I mean, I'm from Georgia, I'll complain about it all the time, my husband's like, all DMVs are like that, no,
Yep.
they're not. That's because everything goes back to the state, like in Georgia, everything's at the county level, so when you move to that particular county, that county gets the revenue from the taxes and then can appropriately, but everything here goes back
Just
to
to Raleigh.
Raleigh.
They want
And that's why
tax
I'm like,
dollars
all the
back to
time, I'm
Raleigh.
like, he's like, just like that, I'm like,
It's all about the Benjamin.
Yeah. and boy, when it's not.
They never seen a dollar up there they didn't like to spend.
Exactly. Or $1.10 when they only have a buck.
Right.
So that's a synopsis. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate your understanding. I appreciate your attention. I look forward to getting your comments through Ed. So next month, we're going to talk about Article 4 only. That's districts. And I'm going to show you how I'm reestablishing your districts. And we're going to start talking about your comp plan. We're going to talk about the surveys I've received, and we're going to go over your data element, i.e., what your housing look like, what your economy look like, what your population look like, what's your racial breakdown of your population. All the general statistical analysis that is important to a comp plan, but it's boring. It is, but it's necessary because it helps identify policies, goals, and initiatives as we move down the line. And I give you an opportunity to play with that.
Those surveys just go out to us, or do they go out to the community?
The surveys for the comp plan went out to the community.
How many of those did you get back?
I believe 68.
Sounds about right.
Of how many, out of how many?
4,500, is that how many per you used?
37, I think.
37, so 68. Yeah,
And
good.
we're probably going to get more, but remember, the surveys are just designed to start soliciting feedback, again, of what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see, what you don't want to see. It's to try to give some flavor as to how the community wants to see itself grow. The data element that I'm talking about, obviously, is just based on U.S. Census data and the state of North Carolina demography results.
Yeah, 68 until you say we're gonna have a high intensity development, then 3,200.
They prefer
people
to
turn
give
down.
us feedback via screaming from chairs. So
Yes.
unless,
They should.
And remember, these meetings and the meetings of your elected officials are open to the public. The public comes up, has a question, or wants to make a statement, I'm obviously cataloging that because that's important. This is going to be a public process. This is going to be a public developed plan, a public developed comp plan. Because I can't do it any other way, because that would be setting you up to fail.
is there a way to put like a banner or something at our public events like the movie night and the yard sale for people to understand that there's a survey that went out?
We would just have to get a banner made.
Something like that where people, I
Well,
guarantee.
It's fixing to close though.
Yeah.
Can you go on the website and do it?
Yeah.
Up until the 21st.
That's the
Nobody
website.
goes to the website. They don't need to-
I'm gonna tell you, 'cause as soon as it's all done, everybody's gonna go, I didn't know about a survey.
Yeah, I only got like 3 left.
All right.
That's good.
Well,
All right,
it's,
Michael, I appreciate you being here tonight and talking with us, and look forward to
Well,
hearing from you next month.
thank you all for your attention and your comments thus far. I look forward to getting more. And this is, like I said, this is going to be a fun process. Just hang with me.
All right. I'd like to open the floor up for public comments. Do we have any?
Good, none?
With none, then we'll have to close that. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have adjournment on, adjournment.
I make a motion that,
You're
Doug-
probably